Hey there, guess what? If you're a farmer, you can have your low tunnels paid for by the NRCS. They have this cool new program where farmers can get $4 to $5 for each square foot to help with a Quick Hoops low tunnel system, frames and fabric included. It's like free money to help you grow more stuff on your farm. Want to learn more about Quick Hoops and the NRCS program? Click on the link below. Say somebody's in a no-till situation, they have cover crops that they're growing, like they're doing what they can via management practices to encourage soil growth. If you wanted to, I'll say fast track, maybe slow track on a long ecological scale, things along in terms of building soil, do you think adding microbes to the soil makes sense?
My initial answer is yes. And I have to admit, I have a conflict of interest. I work for a company that sells microbial soil inoculants. And so what we see is when you add select species to a natural environment, you generally will see a response in terms of greater productivity. It's not just us, it's other people as well. But you don't see it consistently. That's one of the things about microbial soil inoculants. They're generally considered inconsistent at best and snake oil at worst, but they do work. And so the question becomes, well, why is that? Why couldn't you just develop a natural population to do that same thing? And again, to go back to Midwestern Bioag and Gary Zimmer, they will feed humic acid and they'll use no-till and they'll do a lot of things. And over time, their hypothesis was, well, we can, and also composting, that we can build that up more naturally than applying a direct fed microbial, if you will, a microbial soil amendment. Now, the fault in that logic is, what is manure? Or what is running sheep or cattle over a field? Well, you're adding microbes. That's what manure is. It's a prebiotic and a probiotic. Think of the microbes you're adding as probiotics, agricultural probiotics. And oftentimes you need to have what we call a microbial food supplement, kelp extract, humic acid, molasses. In India, we use mill mud, all the residue of crushing the sugar cane and putting back everything but the sugar back on the field. So that's akin to feeding the soil with particular microbes. And we can talk about why I think that's useful.
Let's do that. Why do you think that's useful?
Yeah, okay. So, and Gary Harmon, who's a retired professor at Cornell, wrote a really nice paper on trichoderma, a review paper. And he talks about trichoderma in particular and other soil fungi and microbes. And talks about the fact that there are certain microbes that really do seem to, even if they're naturally present, like many trichoderma species are naturally present in the soil. But sometimes population density makes a real difference. It's like a probiotic. People would argue, I'm going to answer your question here in a minute. I realize I'm circling around it.
No, that's okay.
If you're not taking a probiotic, you should be. But some people would say, if you drink kombucha and eat, raw sauerkraut and kimchi and things along those lines, you'll be just fine. Yet there's a body of scientific evidence that say, look, there are certain probiotics that are better than just trying to get it all from your environment. The same thing with agricultural probiotics. And there's a thing called quorum sensing. Do you know what quorum sensing is? Or maybe some of your listeners would not know what it is.
Explain that.
Yeah, okay, so quorum sensing, the best analogy I can make is like you're sitting at a party and it's midnight and it's really not very exciting and you're about ready to signal to your friends, hey, let's go home or go somewhere else. All of a sudden somebody shows up with live music and alcohol. And boy, things really start to click. Well, that's quorum sensing. And it's I think a relatively well-accepted scientific principle that microbes practice quorum sensing, that there are certain microbes that will stimulate activity in others. In other words, it is interesting that you've got 1 billion cells per gram of soil already in most soils. So you got people like us taking rhizolizer and putting it into the field, which isn't nearly that density, and you're magically getting these responses, and you do get them. We see increases of 20% to 80% in certain crops with the addition of our trichoderma plus bacillus combination. And so you think, well, how are they competing? Well, they may not be competing with those other microbes. They may actually be turning them on. And a good anecdote I have for that, I worked for Diversa Corporation here in San Diego for a long time. Diversa was instrumental in the development of the field of environmental sequencing, which is now known as metagenomics. Environmental sequencing means you just go in there and you just sequence everything. 99% of the microbes in the world aren't culturable. We can find them through metagenomics, but we can't actually make them grow. And so we did a lot of environmental sequencing, and you could eventually, through annotation, determine, okay, there's all these different species there. But we're always frustrated by the fact, and this is the mid 2000s, that, okay, we didn't know what the cultures looked like, or we couldn't culture them. Eric Mather and his team got together, and they were able to encapsulate 1 or 2 cells in a gel bead that was permeable. Then they would extract the cells from the ocean, a peat bog, soil, whatever it happened to be, pack a column with those gel beads, and then run a solution of soil extract or ocean water, what it happened to be, through that. And lo and behold, things just started to grow like crazy. And the message to me was that they were all communicating. In other words, when you try to use Cook's principles, right, which is a single organism on a plate and get it to grow independently, these are social creatures. They won't grow oftentimes independently. They need each other, and they need certain signals. So quorum sensing to me, and the reason I think soil amendments, microbial soil amendments work as long as they're alive, and fresh, and are put out at high enough density, and they're put out with things that they can feed on, these microbial food supplements. We should talk about that they may be acting as quorum sensing. In other words, they're completing that picture. And the other analogy of that I use is like you buy a Ford F-150, all tricked out, and it's got gas in the tank, but you forgot to put a steering wheel in it. You're not going anywhere. Or I played French horn in high school in a symphony orchestra. And if you went to a full orchestra with everybody there, it's just a wonderful experience. But if you leave out, especially if you leave out the French horns, but also the violins, it's just not going to be the same thing. Nobody's going to perform as well. And so I think what happens with those organisms that we have found work well as microbial soil amendments are acting to improve everybody around them. They're acting to a certain extent as quorum sensors that will actually cause that whole ecosystem now to bloom a little bit, more prolifically, and get everybody involved in creating the functionality you want to create the optimal environment for that crop to grow.
Is this the case then that anything you can do to add microbes to your soil would probably be beneficial? It's just a question of how beneficial. So if I think about traditional ag, if we look around the world, you have biodynamics, you have Korean natural farming, you have composting, you have people doing compost teas. Do you think that just blanketing all those things, that they're helpful? It's just a matter of how helpful they actually are?
I think you have to have the right, number one, you need to support the native microbiology that's there through all these regenerative practices that we've talked about. Composting, cover crops, minimum tillage, a whole variety of that, in order to make as healthy as possible those microbes that are naturally in the soil. But I do believe, and like I said, I think composting is in this category, that if you're going to then add microbes or running your cattle over your pasture, you're adding microbes, and that will help stimulate those other organisms that are there to perform better. And I think it's a matter of having a functional metagenome. So let's talk about environmental sequencing and a metagenome. What is that? It comes back to the symphony orchestra. We'll use that one as a continuing example. That you may have a microbe present, but it may not actually be actively growing until it gets stimulated to do so by another organism. And it could be that putting the right microbe in that particular metagenome will actually turn everybody else on. So ultimately, my answer is yes, that if you can find the right organisms that have the right functionality to complete that metagenome, to make it as functional as possible, you're going to improve things. And I do think that you then also have to create an environment for that added microbial to do its job, which is typical regenerative practices. But like I said, I feel, and I think there's data to support it from other people as well, that you want to add materials that organisms can use for food. because it needs to get started. And until it can get itself established with a growing crop and let the roots feed it, it's going to have a hard time expressing that functionality that a whole metagenome needs.
Hello, growers. Want to boost your sales, reach new customers, and streamline your sales process, all from your home office? Ready Farmer 1, my book, is your ultimate guide to making it happen. Imagine increasing your farm's revenue without ever spending a Saturday at the farmer's market. The book will show you how to create, design, and market an online farm store, learn from real farmers sharing real stories about how they move their stores online, freeing up their weekends and increasing their sales. Get my book, Ready Farmer 1, on Amazon and transform your farm business today.